Thank you, Jasper. I brought with me a piece of paper to help me, just in case I get off track. What I'm going to talk about today, this talk came to be after me reading a book called Black Box Thinking. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we react to failure. I'm going to share a couple of stories from my own life and how I reacted in those situations. And we will look at two accidents from different industries, one from healthcare and one from aviation, before we circle everything back to skydiving and before we look towards a future full of learning opportunities. Apuria Brava 2005. I had just started to nail my head down flying. Now I'd been to Apuria several times before, so I'd gotten to know some of the people there. David Nimmo, one of the local organizers, had a group of French skydivers doing some head-down jumps. I asked Nimmo if I could join, and he said, "Yeah, sure, mate, but this is a high-level group, so if you're not up for it, I'm bringing out my shotgun." I'd known Nimmo for some time, so I knew exactly what that meant, but I wasn't too worried about that. I was so stoked to get to jump with these guys. It felt like a huge accomplishment to be a part of that group. I can guarantee you that they knew that I did not have the skills to be on that skydive. As soon as we left the door, it became obvious to everyone that I did not have the skills to be on that skydive. Obvious to everyone but me. I was off level, all over the place. I went under the formation, came up on the other side. It was a mess. When we landed, one of the French guys came over to me with a big smile, and he asked very nicely, "So, how was your jump?" And I said, "It was good." This, of course, just confirming what they already knew. The thing is, I didn't know. I didn't know I shouldn't be on that jump. I came from a very small drop zone with no experienced free flyers. I did not have the experience to understand that I created a dangerous situation. Also, I did not understand that by asking me how my jump was, he actually invited me to talk about what had happened, and maybe I could learn something. But learning was not on my mind. Being cool was on my mind. A few moments later, Nimmo came over with his big shotgun. "Sorry, mate, I'm bringing out the shotgun." And now I immediately realized I didn't have the skill to be on that jump. I was so disappointed in myself. I had just been kicked off the group that I so much wanted to be a part of. The interesting part is that not even once did I think, how can I learn from this? Instead, my only focus was, how do I still look as cool as possible after being kicked off this group? That's true. Now let's fast forward a few years. Year is 2009. By now, I had been given the opportunity to be a part of the Norwegian Freefly team. And with that position came organizer jobs. When I started to organize, I had this massive fear of not being good enough. I was afraid to make mistakes. I was afraid that people would realize that I did not know what I was doing. Because that's how I felt. I felt like an imposter. And that feeling stuck with me for a long time. Now, clearly someone believed that I was good enough to do the job, or else I wouldn't have been invited to that event. But still, I was afraid of making mistakes. During my years of organizing, I've made my fair share of mistakes, but very few of them I have shared with others. I believe that I can count on one hand the amount of times when I led the group and I made a mistake and I brought it up to my group that day. At the same time, I cannot count the amount of times when I made a mistake and I found myself under canopy thinking, I hope nobody noticed that. And then when I land with this very unpleasant feeling, and we look around to see if there's any reactions or any comments, or if it will in fact go by unnoticed. Then on the debrief, not mentioning anything, not to my group, not to the other group, not to anyone. What is the reason I did not use that opportunity for everyone to learn? My big fat ego came in the way. I had such a fixed mindset. It was more important to me to try and protect my reputation and my purely positional status that I chose to rob everyone of that learning opportunity. Now, had I managed to keep my ego in check and let my growth mindset lead the way, I am sure that it would have been a learning opportunity for everyone, and that I would have grown both as a person and as a coach. Also, chances are that 1, 2, 3, maybe the whole group, they did know I made that mistake. And now, by not bringing it up, I'm covering it up. What do you think happens to them trusting me now? The trust goes straight out the window. And what happens to my reputation that I was so worried about? And what is the message I'm sending? I will give you an example. I was organizing at Angle Week. It was a cloudy day with challenging conditions. We had Nina on the ground, we had James in the pilot seats, we had a bunch of experienced organizers, so we were quite confident that we were going to pull this off. Due to the conditions, we did not know what our jump run would be, so we decided that one group go left, one group go right. On jump run, the other organizer asked me very loudly, "Which way are you going?" "I'm going right!" Door up, we jumped, did a good skydive, we landed well. After I land, the other organizer comes up to me and said, "So, which way did you go?" I instantly realized I'd gone opposite of what I said. She, of course, had seen this on my exit, and she saw it looking out the door, so she took her group the other way. I did not mention anything to my group on the debrief. I did not tell them that I had tracked them the wrong way. But for sure, they must have known. Or did they? Maybe they were so focused on following me that they did not notice that I took them the wrong way. Either way, multiple opportunities to learn. I did not say one word about it. I did not even think of it as a learning experience or opportunity for anyone but myself. I was mostly worried about everyone knowing that I made a mistake. It's a big responsibility to lead people around the sky. A responsibility I believe every organizer takes very seriously. The picture that I had of myself and my role as an organizer was that making mistakes when responsible for others was not an option. It was simply not allowed to happen. So when it did happen, when I did make mistakes, it always hit me hard, and I got embarrassed. And I got mad at myself. But very, very rarely did I deliberately create a learning opportunity for myself and others. Then we have the occasions where we do make mistakes, but they're so obvious that that everybody knows that it has happened. I was loadmaster on an in-hop to the Coastal Islands in Sweden. I was in the door, responsible for checking the spot. We did 2 passes. After dropping the first pass, the pilot did a sharp turn, something I perceived as a 180-degree turn. So I looked up at the light, and it was green. So I stuck my head out the window for half a microsecond, not the window, the door for half a second, looked back, pointed to the group that was supposed to go first on the second pass, said, yes, you're good to go. And they looked at me with big eyes and very surprised, so I repeated, yes, it's your turn. They jumped, I started to climb out with my group, and by now, the plane is going like this. So the pilot's wiggling the plane from side to side to get us to stop. Someone pulls us back inside, and I realize maybe we're not exactly where we're supposed to be. We did another pass. Green light comes on, look down, looks good. We all jump, we land well. When I had landed, I asked about the 2 girls that I had told to jump. And I was very surprised to learn that they had not been seen at all. It took me a few moments to admit to myself that I had fucked this up quite royally, and that I had no idea where I had told them to jump. Realizing this, I went to the jump leader, and we decided to scramble the full rescue force. So we got the Sea King choppers from Norway, and we got all the rescue boats from Stromstad. At the same time as this was going on, I'm trying to figure out where did we drop these 2 girls. After talking to the pilot, I started to walk in the direction I thought would be the correct way. I quickly borrowed a bike and started to pedal as fast as I could. Sitting on that bicycle, I knew there was a real chance that this would not end well. And I remember I could feel the unmistakable, devastating feeling that I had in my heart years before, when a low turn that looked like it was going to end well still ended in the loss of life. And I remember thinking, what if we find them injured or dead? What if we never find them? How do I explain to their parents and children that their mother and daughter died because I made a mistake? Arriving all the way the opposite side of the island, I met the 2 girls walking towards me, smiling and holding their canopies. The 2 people that I was afraid had died due to my negligence were standing right in front of me. It's one of the most intense feelings of joy I have ever felt, and I cried so much. This was a story about when a mistake happens and it does not go by unnoticed. When there is no chance that we can weasel our way out of it to save our ego. Sometimes that happens. And when that happens, we are left with two options. We can take responsibility for our actions, or we can try and push the blame over to something or someone else. In my experience from this skydiving world, most of the time, we do take responsibility for our actions. So then, when all the cards are on the table, and there is no chance of getting away with it, then we do take responsibility. What is the reason that we don't show the same responsibility on the occasions where it could have gone by unnoticed? Clearly, we have what it takes to deal with it, but still, sometimes we don't until we are forced into doing so. Does that mean that we are taking responsibility only because getting away with it is no longer an option? And because we are socially smart enough to realize that now I have to own up to my mistakes and take responsibility for what happened? Maybe that is the way to get off the hook. Now let's move to a story from the healthcare system. 37-year-old Elaine Bromley was going in for routine surgery. Her husband, Martin Bromley, and their two children followed Elaine to the hospital. Elaine waved to her kids as they rolled her in to the pre-operating room. The doctors told her, "It's a routine surgery. We'll have you out in no time." Martin and the kids went to the shop next door to get Elaine fake cookies and waited for her to come home. For this operation, Elaine would had to be sedated. Now, anesthetic is a very powerful drug, and while being sedated, Elaine would need help breathing. To help with her breathing, the doctor will use a breathing mask with a tube that goes over Elaine's mouth and into her airway. But there was a problem. Elaine's jaw had locked. Now, the doctor had seen this before, so he just added a bit more drugs to loosen up the jaw. Now, with Elaine's mouth open, the doctor tried to fit the mask, but it wouldn't fit. Something was in the way. Two more doctors arrived to help, but they just could not get the mask and the tube to fit. All the time while working on this problem, they can follow Elaine's blood oxygen level on the screen right in front of them. One of the nurses in the operating room had seen incidents like this before, and she knew that the emergency procedure for situations like this is to intubate the patient via the throat instead of the mouth. The nurse went to get the emergency intubation kit. It only took her a split of a second, and then she called out to the doctors that the emergency kit is now ready. But the doctors just looked at her and then went back to working on the problem with Elaine. The nurse was surprised by their reaction, and she wanted to call out again, but she doubted herself. She thought, surely 3 experienced doctors must know what they're doing. Maybe if she called out again, she would only disturb them, end up making matters worse. She was afraid of causing more damage. "20 minutes after Elaine was given the initial anesthetic, the breathing mask was finally in place. The doctors looked at the time and were baffled by how much time had passed. They could not understand that it had taken so long to get the mask to fit. Shortly after Martin Romney arrived at home, his phone rang. It was the hospital asking him to come down as soon as he could. When he arrived at the hospital, he learned that his wife had died. Martin was shocked. How could this have happened? It was supposed to be a routine surgery. What happened? When asking what had happened, the doctor said there was a problem during the anesthetic. It was a one-off. These things happened, the doctor said. The anesthetist had done as good as he could, but there was nothing they could do. He said he was so sorry, and he offered the deepest apologies. Now, nothing was told to Martin about the countless tries of getting the mask to fit, or about the nurse that had been ready with the emergency intubation kit. Nobody took responsibility or even offered an honest explanation. Then we have an example from the aviation industry. United Airlines Flight 173 took off from JFK International on the 20th of December 1978, destined for Portland, Oregon, with a scheduled stopover in Denver. Malber McBroom, a war veteran who had been flying airplanes during the Second World War, was the pilot on the flight. It was a clear blue sky, and flying conditions were close to perfect. When they started their descent to Portland, the captain pulled the lever to lower the landing gear. Now, normally, this is followed by a smooth sound of the landing gear lowering and then locking into place with a distinct click. Today, this was not the case. Today, there was a loud noise that could be heard by everyone on board the airplane, and in the cockpit, one of the lights indicating that the landing gear is down had failed to turn green. The captain radioed Portland Patrol, asking for more flying time to troubleshoot this problem. Portland Approach directed Flight 173 into a holding pattern on the south side of Portland. The crew now started a series of checks to see if, in fact, the landing gear was down. They checked by the wings, because by the wings on a DC-8, behind the wings, there's two bolts that come up and are visible if the landing gear is down. The bolts were visible, so the landing gear was most likely down. They also contacted United Airlines System Maintenance Center in California. Everything seemed to indicate that the landing gear was down. Still, the captain was insecure. He just could not be sure. The captain knew that landing without the landing gear down carried serious risks. McBroom, a responsible pilot, he wanted to be sure. As the plane circled over Portland, he searched for an answer. He pondered why the light indicating that the landing gear was down had failed to turn green. Was there any way they could check the wiring? He searched his mind for answers. Was there any other way that they could troubleshoot this problem? As McBroom was trying to figure out a solution to the landing gear problem, there was another problem looming. A problem that had until now only been in the far, far distance, but now was becoming ever more real. Flight 173 had 21,000 liters of fuel when they departed Denver. More than enough to safely get them to land in Portland. But a DC-8 burns fuel at 93 4 liters per minute, approximately. The plane could not circle indefinitely. At some point, McBroom would have to bring the plane into land. At 17:46 local time, the fuel level dropped to 5 on the dials. The situation was still within control, but the margin for error was shrinking. Time was becoming ever more critical. The engineer on board told the pilot that the fuel is rapidly running out. But McBroom did not respond in the way that the engineer had expected. McBroom was still focusing on the landing gear, determined they would not land without the landing gear down. He had to find a solution to the problem. At 17:50, the engineer tried again to alert the pilot of the low reserves in the fuel tanks. McBroom responded, "There's 15 minutes left of fuel in the tanks." But he was wrong. He seemed to have lost track of time. 15 minutes, the engineer replied with disbelief in his voice. Not enough. 15 minutes is really going to run us low on fuel here. For each second, the fuel was disappearing fast. A holding pattern had now turned into potential catastrophe. Not only for the passengers and crew, but for the citizens of South Portland. The first officer and the engineer could not understand why the captain did not head directly for the airport. Surely fuel was now the principal danger. The landing gear hardly mattered anymore. But the captain was the authority figure. He was the boss. He had the experience and the seniority. At 18:06, the fuel was so low that one of the engines flamed out. The engineer informed the pilot that they had lost an engine. Even now, the pilot was completely oblivious to the catastrophic situation. His awareness of time was completely gone. Why? The captain asked, surprised. Why? The captain asked, surprised, when he was told of the loss of an engine. Fuel, replied his engineer. Flight 173 had been perfectly able to land all the time. Later, the investigation showed that the landing gear was in fact down. Even if it had not been, an experienced pilot can land the plane without the loss of life. At 18:10 local time, carrying 189 people, United Airlines Flight 173 crash landed in the suburbs of South Portland, only 6 nautical miles from the airport. 10 people died and 24 was injured. The reason I have chosen these 2 last stories is because they hold certain similarities. In both situations, the people in charge are responsible for human lives. In both situations, the people in charge lose perspective of time. They are so focused on one thing that they fail to see the catastrophe happening right in front of their eyes. Now, if you have ever jumped out of an airplane, you know exactly what it's like to have your perception narrow. To be so focused on one thing that you fail to see, hear, or register anything else. Now, we don't lose perception because we're bad people or because we don't care. We lose perception because that's how the human mind works. And it was exactly the same for the doctors in the operating room. And it was exactly the same for the captain of Flight 173. There is another reason these two stories are relevant for us, and that is the total opposite in reactions in the aftermath of the accidents. In the story from the healthcare industry, where Elaine Bromley died on the operating table, the only thing offered from the hospital was, "We're so sorry." It was a one-off. There was nothing we could do. Then, on the other hand, we have the story from the aviation industry with Flight 173. In aviation, learning from failure is hardwired into the system. All airliners are carrying two black boxes, one cockpit voice recorder and one that records all the instructions sent to the onboard electronic system. That is how we know what happened on Flight 173. Aviation has a culture of full investigation, a culture of full transparency, where mistakes are not stigmatized, but regarded as a learning opportunity. Any evidence compiled by the Accident Investigation Branch is inadmissible in court proceedings. This increases the likelihood of full disclosure. After an investigation, the report is made available for everyone. And as a direct cause of Flight 173, the aviation industry has today something called Crew Resource Management, which is a training program for interpersonal communication, leadership, and decision-making in the cockpit of an airliner. I believe that we, the skydiving community, holds a lot of similarities with the aviation industry, maybe especially on the gear side of our sport. As soon as there's something going on with some gear, then the manufacturer sends out a service bulletin. Sometimes gear is grounded. Information is available for everyone, and we happily share what has happened to us if we had something to do with the situation, or our gear had something to do with that situation. But I can also see that we sometimes tend to lean towards the story of Elaine Bromley. Too often, we fail to see the learning opportunity because we are too focused on ourselves, too focused on not being called out, not losing face, not being cut from the group, not be the one that made the mistake. People will make mistakes, and accidents will happen in skydiving. And you have already accepted that, or else you would not be skydiving today. But we have to get the mistakes and accidents down to a minimum. We have to do everything we can to prevent mistakes and accidents. This is true. And how do we do that? Do we do that by hiding our mistakes, hoping nobody will say anything? Do we do that by pretending it didn't happen? Blaming someone else? Or do we want to be part of and creating a culture where mistakes are taken so seriously that they become a tool to help us learn and prevent the same thing from happening ever again? To achieve this, each and every one of us have to look towards ourselves, to redefine how we look at failure in skydiving and in our daily life. To deal with it up here so we can deal with it in here. Instead of shying away from criticism and inconvenient evidence, we should embrace it. Realize that failure is a valuable opportunity to learn. This will not be easy, and you will, without a doubt, feel resistance, but the battle is worth it. Thank you.